Hi, welcome to this little bite-sized session around conversations around mental health. The aim of this is to really give you some tips and things to think about when you're having a conversation with a child or young person about mental health. And I really need to stress that, you don't need to be an expert to have these conversations. You just need to be able to listen. And obviously there are different types of listening. So active listening is what we need to practice, and it is a skill that we need to practice. But the more we do it, the more it becomes second nature. So that's the whole aim of this little session. So just a little introduction then to the session. Being a proactive professional at the earliest opportunity to have these conversations can make the difference and can be a really positive outcome for that child or young person. So, have the confidence when you notice something, and we did a previous session around signs and symptoms and things you might notice where somebody is behaving differently. So actually build on that, and then the next step really is, let's have that conversation. Let's listen to how that young person and that child is feeling. It may actually prevent things escalating. So what we've found, and certainly what I've found in my experience, is the sooner we actually deal with something, like lots of things in our life, the sooner we deal with it, face it head on and actually take some steps and some action, then the more likely it is to get resolved earlier, not to escalate, not to become something more serious where then that child or young person might actually then need some of the professional services that are available through CAMHS, etc. And, it's about that listening, and you don't need to be an expert to listen. So just thinking about the planning then of this, we don't always have the opportunities to do this exactly how we would like to. This stuff that I'm talking about is like perfect world stuff. And sometimes that's not always the case, is it? We have to go with what we've got. But it's just to give you some ideas and some things to think about, because when we're talking about our emotional health and we're talking about mental health struggles and issues, then there are some things that are going to be really, really important. And that can have a really adverse effect if we don't actually deal with them properly. So I've included some of those things in this planning. So it's really about finding a suitable place where you won't be disturbed. And I know sometimes just from visiting schools and different settings, sometimes that can be quite difficult. So that's something that you can plan for all the time and think, well, if we haven't got a suitable space, then we need to create one. We need to have somewhere that we're able to have that conversation, because that's going to be a really important starting point of all of this. Allow enough time for yourself, enough time for that young person, that child, how long it might take them to talk about how they're feeling. So be honest. And if you haven't got that time, then make that time, at a suitable place and time when you can actually put your full attention to it. It's no good if you know that you've got something that you absolutely can't get out of. So being honest about the time that you've got, again, that can be really helpful for people. Minimising any distractions. So, if you've got your sort of phone and it's there on the desk vibrating away and distracting you, put it away, put it out, leave it out of that conversation altogether. Things like clocks on the wall, things like that can be really distracting sometimes. So anything that's going to distract you, try and minimise that as much as you possibly can. And that will make a big difference, because remember, when somebody's feeling really emotional and upset and all they want is somebody to really listen, and they want to feel that somebody's really listening to them, they will pick up on absolutely anything. So you just glancing up at the clock or looking away or looking at your watch, all of these are kind of little suggestions to that person. Well, actually, they haven't really got time for me. They're just going through the motions, and we don't want that. The timing can be crucial. So, if you have got concerns about a child or a young person, just think about the effect it will have on them if you are going to say at the beginning of a session, well, I'd like to see you at the end of the session, or can I see you later on today? Just think, if they're already anxious, that's going to actually increase how they're feeling and increase that level of anxiety. So just think about how and when you're going to actually set up that conversation in the first place. And then think about how you're going to start the conversation. Don't just sort of think, right, I'm going to speak to them, and then not give it any thought. And I'll explain a little bit more about what I mean. The conversation itself, really, it's fairly simple. You don't need to overcomplicate it. You don't need to get into sort of complicated language or any sort of skills really. Just say what you've noticed. Be really honest. And if you've noticed that a child suddenly seems to be wanting all of your attention and asking lots of questions, then that's not usually how they behave. Or if they are really quiet and really well behaved, or just anything that is out of their normal behaviour that's alerted you to the fact that there might be something going on, just tell them that's what you've noticed. And actually that can be really helpful for somebody, not just children and young people, but adults as well, because it's, well, actually I've taken notice because I care, because I want to support you, I want to help you. So actually it can be a really positive thing, telling them that you've actually noticed something. Listening non-judgmentally. I'm sure we've all been in conversations with people where we've felt that we're being judged, and that has a really negative impact. So we need to be, just any judgments, we need to be putting those to one side when we're going to have conversations around mental health and around our emotional feelings, etc. Don't interrupt. Don't try and come up with solutions. As adults, we're very solution focused, and that's probably what you're doing all day. It's probably part of your job in essence, is solving problems for people all the time. In this scenario, try and just put that to one side and try and just sort of actually listen. So, not kind of coming in with your ideas of what might help, etc. Give them all your focus and attention, really important again, and that's where minimising distractions can help. And also, don't think that you've got to fill every silence. Sometimes this might be the first time that somebody has asked how somebody's feeling and what's going on for them. And they might be processing that a little bit for themselves and thinking, or they might be struggling to find the words, particularly young children might not actually be able to verbalise or find the words for how they're feeling. So that might be that you have to think about other ways of doing that, drawing pictures or other ways of actually unlocking what it is that's going on for them. But don't feel that you've got to fill silence. It does feel uncomfortable, but try and fight that and let that silence develop a little bit, because that again might be really helpful, and it might just be what that child, or maybe particularly young people, sort of older children, might actually need that silence to develop. Just moving on as well, being empathic, really important, trying to put ourselves into their shoes, because it might be that whatever it is that's making them feel anxious might actually be very unlikely to happen, really sort of outside the realms of possibility. We might know that as adults, but they don't necessarily know that. That's how they're feeling, that's how it's affecting them, that's what's making them anxious and worried. And things like, oh, cheer up, or everybody's feeling like that, or, oh, you'll get over it. All these kind of glib comments sometimes that people make, avoid those. They're not helpful. Take into account cultural differences. I'm sure you'll be aware, if you have got different cultural differences within your classroom setting or within your setting with young people, that there will be cultural differences, particularly around eye contact and what's comfortable. So don't sort of focus too much. It's always the first thing that people think about when they're talking about body language and comfortable body language. People always remember eye contact. Well, if somebody's really anxious, it's unlikely they're going to give you any eye contact at all. So that's usually the first thing. So don't worry about that. But also, it's what's comfortable, isn't it? So don't try and focus on that too much. Lots of reassurance that there's lots of support out there, both internally in your own setting, but also externally. There's lots of other things going on that have been put together to support children and young people externally from your own settings. Validate that what they're telling you, take it seriously. As I've said, it might be something that is really unlikely to happen, and that as an adult, but for that child or that young person, that's a very real concern that is causing them some anxiety and some worry, and actually affecting how they're feeling emotionally. So really take it seriously. What I've always thought and found is that if I'm ever stuck for an open question to start a conversation, then I always remember Ted. Tell me about how you're feeling, explain to me how you're feeling, describe to me how you're feeling. So that's a good way to remember, because those 3 open questions will suit most scenarios you'll ever be faced with. asking how you can help, actually ask them. They're the ones who know what might be able to help. So ask them, what kind of support do you think would help you? And how are you feeling at the moment? Really focus on the feelings. Don't focus on the problem solving and the solution focused bit. That can come later. At this moment in time, when you're having that initial conversation, just focus on the feelings. How is that person feeling? How is it for them? Let them tell you. You listen, they tell. And then I'd like to introduce our young people's wellbeing ambassadors, who are going to just talk about how important talking has been for them and how that continues to be an important thing that they use now to actually build resilience and manage their own emotional and mental well-being.
It's quite good, like you said, to just talk. Like it's when teachers or even parents just interrupt you. Like say if I was talking about something and they'd stop me and then I'd lose my train of thought and then I kind of don't really want to carry on.
Yeah.
I start to think about what I'm saying. I'm like, oh, maybe not. But like when we were in school as well, I think it annoyed me, even if you did tell a teacher and even if they did listen, it was great when they went on and made it obvious during class or asked you to stay behind in front of the whole class and made you feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And like people were judging you.
Yeah, because it's one thing making people comfortable in the situation where you're talking to them, so kind of trying to make it as informal as possible rather than sat opposite one another, like this is like a meeting kind of thing. I
Like,
think that makes you uncomfortable.
everything.
Yeah, so it's one thing making the conversation comfortable, but it's another thing making sure that as a teacher you don't overwhelm and you don't single out that one person just because they've spoken to you. I think
a lot for me, like when you get special treatment, do you know what I mean? You go to someone to speak to them just to listen. You don't want to be made to feel like different to everyone.
Yeah, a lot of the time it is just about having someone to speak to and someone there that you can kind of talk at rather than, talk to, yes, and I think it's important they do offer you next steps, if you like, but I feel like those next steps don't always have to be, go see the school counsellor, go have an appointment with
you need to the doctor, you need to go.
Yeah, I don't think those next steps are always helpful. I think a lot of the time the next steps just need to provide reassurance that you've got somewhere to go, like maybe one of the teacher's offices if you ever felt overwhelmed within school or in a situation that you couldn't cope with.
Almost open door policy where if you feel overwhelmed you can come speak to me, like I'm always here. They just need to reassure you that you're not alone and you have someone.
Here are some helpful resources. The How Are You Feeling website, loads and loads of stuff on there for staff, for parents, carers, for the young children and young people themselves. The Hull City Psychological Service resources. And also Mind have got lots of free downloadable booklets. So if you go on the National Mind website, there's lots of information there about different mental health conditions, about different aspects of life and mental health. At the moment, Living Life to the Full is a CBT, a cognitive behavioural therapy package. And at the moment, that's been free until the end of June, but it's a licensed package that we use anyway. So I can recommend it. I've used it with supporting other people. Don't forget your mental health first aiders. Within your schools and settings, you probably have a lot of youth mental health first aiders who could actually give you some of their resources. There's lots of different resources, things like the stress container, the Take Time Together toolkit, which helps you have a conversation, gives some good tips and pointers. And then also Action for Happiness. It's a great website, 10 Keys to Happier Living. So that sort of follows on from the 5 Ways to Wellbeing, but they also do lots of other things, and there's lots of little videos at the moment coming up on social media that they've put together around managing feelings and thoughts in these COVID-19 times, but also just as relevant for any other time as we move forward. Thank you.